Welcome to the Product Design Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Coelen, founder of UX Cabin, where we create world-class web and mobile apps. I'm excited to bring you a behind-the-scenes look into the lives of some of the most interesting and talented people in product design. We'll get strategic advice on how they got to where they are today and things they wish they would have known earlier in their career. Hey, what's up, friends? Today we have Morgan Denner with us. He is the Chief Experience Officer at TechFleet and lead UX designer at Hopscotch. We have got a really interesting episode, and I am thrilled to have you here, Morgan.
Great to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So, why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. I come from pretty varied experience in the field. I come from sales and IT and product development before I went into UX. Have a classical education in UX for a graduate degree. And honestly, I had the experience after school of having to reverse engineer everything that I kind of learned in grad school from the perspective of how research runs in the world and how the design process runs in the world. And that has been kind of my specialty in the world with UX strategy, lean UX, agile UX. Taking that into TechFleet has been the focus for the past 2 years for me, and trying to build a global community for kind of like knowledge sharing of how the real world actually works.
So you're telling me that the real world is different than academia?
Yeah. It's a huge gap that, sometimes you don't even see it until you get out there in the world. And you expect that the job hunting process is going to be very easy and straightforward, and people are going to love your portfolio. And then, especially in our field, there's so many people like that out there that there's no way to stand out just by coming from a bootcamp graduate program or a school program.
Right. It's almost worse to get ignored than it is to get rejected.
Yeah, I think that's the overwhelming response that I hear from people, that they just get ghosted. That I don't even know if hiring managers can help it these days. There's so many applications that they have to go through.
Right. Yeah, I guess that, that can lead us into talking a little bit about your experience. So what were some of the things that were different in the real world from what you learned in school?
Yeah. One of the biggest things I learned in the real world is that UX is not waterfall on most teams in the real world. UX is not in a silo. It also doesn't exist in its fullest sense in the real world all the time because of the people that you may work with. They may not believe in UX. They may not know UX. They may not know how to introduce this into the process. We're the experts in UX and how to run the UX process at a company, but that doesn't always exist when we join, when some UX designer joins. So that is not always a given. If you get those limitations and restrictions in bootcamp that everything is very clear, everybody always wants to work with you, and that's not always the case. And sometimes you are up against teams where they're very solution first and they don't do research at all before they build. They do their validation after they build into the world. They do a production application and then they validate. Navigating those waters as the UX designer, it was not something that school taught me at all. I already knew about that from other jobs. I was already in that world before I got into UX. One of the biggest ones, there's so many little examples.
Right. And there's also just so many different scenarios where it's maybe you are the first UX hire, but you're still brand new out of school. And you don't really have the chops to be able to argue for or articulate all of these different scenarios, because all of your scenarios have been an extremely linear process and a very step-by-step way. And it's we got to do UX on this thing and we got 2 weeks, right? Okay, how do you do that? What's the most important thing to do first? What do you cut? What are we trying to find out? So it becomes more so about employing the tools that you've learned versus employing a linear process of do this, then this, then this, then this.
Yeah. That's definitely true. I found that to be true for the way the work proceeds to the process of design and research. I think that holds true for carrying that into the field as well, because depending on the development team you're on, depending on the client you're working with at an agency, you may be in a completely different boat at a completely different step of the process. And you kind of have to make that judgment call in the beginning of the project. If you're taking that on, you have 2 weeks to work on something, you know, figuring that out, how you can make that work is one giant jigsaw puzzle. It like
Right.
could be a different answer every single time, and
Right.
being able to have that critical thinking of the judgment calls and having that confidence of I could make a decision about something and still be able to validate it through research that is iterative, I think to me is the perfect balance, because you can still move quickly and validate quickly. I call it one giant jigsaw puzzle because it's like none of it is a black and white answer. You go to
Right.
10 people and they're all going to say, well, it depends. And they all give you 10 different answers.
And there's always trade-offs, right? It's like the business incentives are to get something done as quick as possible. The research incentives are to thoroughly vet it to its, completed form. And developers or incentives are even different from all of those. So it's like, what are the trade-offs here that we're working with? And are we okay with those? Like,
Yeah.
are we okay doing really, really light research? Maybe just even internal interviews, knowing that we might have to rework a significant portion of this once it gets
Yeah.
to development. How sure are we on this? How new is this concept or this feature? Is it a slam dunk? Could it, be a total flop? And there's all those like political hierarchical questions that we have to like navigate, and different personalities in the room. And it's a jigsaw puzzle would be, putting it lightly.
Yeah. Actually, coming from product development, coming from sales, coming from IT, that really helps a lot, just because of those situations where, a lot of the conversation is about action persuasion. It is not just, here's my design, bye. You're fighting tooth and nail sometimes for those design decisions, and how much you are accountable for those design decisions in the first place is completely up to the team structure. So you walk into that project and you have no idea what you're getting into for 2 weeks until you understand your role on the team, and everything from there falls into place. I think one of the things that I really learned how to like float in any situation like that, because that's the first thing I had to learn in the world, is adaptability. If you have no matter what project is thrown at you, taking the agile process into that always gets you what you need. In my mind, the iterative research that you need, the sample sizes that you need, do not need to be large every week. They don't need to be large, and you don't need to go out and talk to 50 people before you make a decision.
Right.
You can look for patterns in what they say. There are definitely specific approaches in qualitative research that you can use to go through pattern analysis. And also, as a UXer, be prepared to take your shield and defend that research and the limitations of the research. You talk to 4 people and all 4 people said the same thing. It's a pretty strong pattern. But what does it actually mean to the business person who's expecting 40 people to say the same thing and to have a statistical significance behind it? We have to be prepared to make decisions like that in a 2-week project right at the beginning, and then be able to change that at any moment. That's how I learned how to kind of treat any situation in the world, just like project by project, kind of like throwing away the book more or less and saying like, okay, that's the process on paper. Let's just try to figure out how the process should work on this thing.
Right.
And
right.
It always changes.
Yeah. It's kind of like a football play. Like the goal is obviously to get a touchdown. So it's like boot camp is kind of like take ball, move it to touchdown. Like good. That's the process. And then it's like you get into the real world and it's like, okay, well, what play are we going to run to get this to the touchdown? Are we going to do a run? Are we going to do a play action? Are we going to do a pass, short pass, deep pass? Like all of those things. It's like you got to open up the playbook then. And it's not just like going from 0 to 1. It's like going from like, maybe you're at the 1 yard line. Maybe you are at the 50 and it's 4th and 20 and you need to like do something crazy. Like there's all of these different plays that you could run that you would need to employ in like a given business situation.
That's a great analogy. I also think there are times when, going on an analogy, you pick a play, you get out into the field and you're like, all right, I'm going to do this thing. And then it doesn't work. And you're like, oh, crap. All right. Well, now I have to have play version B, C, and D ready on the spot to figure out what to do next. And, you just get used to that, especially as a researcher in the field. You just get used to improvising and adapting, and everything that we do in the field comes with that adaptability need. There definitely are playbooks that, like heuristics, design heuristics or design patterns, or, the things that you get from your typical UX article. Those things are good playbooks in theory on paper.
Yeah.
And then knowing how to kind of take that from there and apply it to your product, your audience, your situation, your project is the thing that like takes us over the edge as experienced UX.
Yeah, totally. No, that's great. I think that's really, really interesting paradigm to think through. So I'm a little interested in your background where you said you went and you got a traditional education in UX, but then your career background started in sales.
Yeah, well before that. I actually dropped out of school at 19 and went into the sales force.
Okay.
Just went into a sales career for about 7 years. And decided to go back to school for IT at 24, and then just worked full-time, went to school full-time from associates to masters. So I went to a degree for IT and then did UX.
Sure. Wow. So why not just stay in sales where you were at?
Sales and IT and product development were all leading up to, honestly, this was fate for me to join the product world, to be the person that builds products and makes things happen, make experience happen. That was a culmination of the experience that I've had for the first 12 years of my career. Why I didn't say in sales is like, that wasn't my passion. It was kind of a means to an end. IT was, like closer to the technology was what I was looking to do. I fell backwards into a BA role, a business analyst role on a software team while I was in grad school, and fell in love with the world of products. And not only wanted to be a UXer, but I actually was a product manager for a while. And that really kind of got me into the world of UX strategy, agile processes all over the place, orchestrating dev teams and making the work happen all over the place. So that's kind of where I turned out. To this day, I straddle between product and UX.
Yeah.
And I kind of do it all in terms of UX. Just because my passion is building the experience itself and everything that makes. So it's just kind of led up to this.
That's cool. So in kind of each of your stages, I'm guessing you kind of like progressively learned what you like a little bit more. So it's like, I don't really love sales. I want to do something in technology. So you go to IT. Then you're like, this is cool, but I want to do something a little bit more, close to software, building the product or whatever. Is that kind of the flow of it?
Yeah, it was more or less a happy accident. I took a class in undergrad for UX in my IT program, nonetheless. I had no idea what UX was. It was like 2018, 2017. And we ended up building a parking app for people who were looking for spots on the street that would kind of blast the free spaces that are on the street. And the rest is history, honestly. We made that a startup in our undergrad program. And I just fell in love with the concept of being able to make things happen, like being able to go out into the world, talk to people, understand who they are. And I love the humanistic aspect of UX too. The building things for humans component, the solving the problems component. Those are the things that I really fell in love with as a UXer.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I think a lot of people, when they make a career switch, they think to themselves, like, I've wasted all of this time in this other career and I'm so far behind and behind the 8 ball. But the interesting thing is I think switching to UX has so many crossovers with so many other careers that it's rarely a waste, especially like product or sales roles or probably even IT. Like we have someone on our team who came from a teaching background and
Hmm.
so many like corollary skill sets that have helped her. And so I was curious, what was your experience with switching over to UX, and like did your other positions help you be better at UX?
Yeah, they definitely helped. I use sales techniques to this day. Every single day of my life, I use the art of persuasion in some way, shape, or form. And being able to handle objections, being able to handle hard customers and hard clients, being able to like just defend your decision, but also know when to let go of like, okay, that's fine. You can put the button there. We can always validate this later. Like that diplomacy across the team is very helpful for getting things done across the product. In IT, like I learned how to orchestrate the other sides of the product besides the software components, the infrastructure components or what that takes. And then by the
Sure.
time I got into my product management field, I was combining both the sales and the IT into product management. And I think it's because of my varied experience that I kind of took it away from research for me and into the world of the strategy side of UX. The going out and doing the research and then coming back and saying, okay, this is what the research says. How can we build our product around that? How can we put the priorities on the things that are highest needs of the users? That's all the UX strategy is, but it's not really a given in product management. So I use my UX skills in product management. When I'm a product manager, I use my product management skills in UX.
Yeah.
When I need to run UX projects, I use sales all the time. Honestly, there are skills in, like you said, in education, in every field. There are skills you can sell yourself, sell others on, like hiring managers. It's always a sales act.
Yeah.
It's just being able to tell that story.
Yeah. Sales is kind of one of those like universally like useful skills. Like,
Mhm.
sometimes the job can be whatever, but it's like if you get sales training or even like customer support training, you'll learn a ton about UX, persuasion, game theory, mental models. Like,
Yeah.
it's
You know how to
great.
deal with really bad stakeholders too. You know how to handle really horrible objections. Oh, sorry, I can't. My first sales job was selling knives door to door, literally selling knives door to door.
Cutco?
Cutco. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And, I was like shamelessly salesy as that job was, it exposes you to build that hardened shell when someone is giving you some type of conflict, being able to A, be diplomatic around it, and B, I think it takes a lot of facilitation and active listening, just like it does in UX. You have to be able to like truly understand what the person who's objecting is coming from. And this plays a role for anything, whether you're in sales or you're having a discussion about designs or research results to be put into a product. You have to understand where that person is coming from. And just like you're talking to a stakeholder or an interviewer, you have to actively listen to them too. You have to actively listen to why they're saying no in part of that objection process. And sometimes you are letting them win, right? But sometimes part of the negotiation is, okay, we don't need to do research before we develop. We can do research after, or we could do it some other way that's non-traditional forget the bootcamp process. We can do it this way too.
Yep.
So that's really where it mainly helps me. UX is a people job, and so is sales. Sales is absolutely a people job, but just like journalism, you have to be able to sell ideas. You have to be able to objectively listen. You have to be able to like objectively present.
Yeah.
So it's been very helpful in all fields that I've been in. Sales has been super helpful.
That's cool. That's cool. So, you get into UX, you're finding success in UX. Why not just stay doing what you're doing at, being an individual contributor? Why go and try to start a community?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in general, I don't want to just be personally in just research, just design. I want to be able to orchestrate the entire thing and help others orchestrate the entire thing. Why the community of TechFleet? There's a huge problem in the world of getting into the jobs that you want in tech. And the motivation behind setting up that community is all around being able to build that gap up between bootcamp and the real world that people are like really suffering with right now.
Yeah. Yeah. We're at this like weird stage in the career of a UXer or a product designer where there's not a super linear path to get there. Like it's, there's a very linear paths for like teacher or lawyer or many career fields out there, but it's like UX, there's like 50 different paths. Some people get there really quick. Some people takes years. Some can make a switch from graphic design. It's just like hard to know. So it's just like, what is the learning path to get a like UX job? And there's not an easy answer to that.
There really isn't. I don't even know if there should be an easy answer to this because UX is such a varied field. Yeah. You have those like design and research and like operational roles. But I feel like, being able to do UX requires much more variance and much more like skill set.
Yeah. It's a double-edged sword because it's like, you don't need to have a degree in a lot of cases to go and do it. But then it's like, well, you don't know then like all of the detailed criteria that you have to be good at it.
Yep. Yeah. I think first and foremost, honestly, it's problem solving and critical thinking. That we are engineers in and of itself. We are engineering solutions, and engineers are basically just problem solving solutions.
Yeah.
Like we're taking that approach scientifically in that regard. I think it all starts with that mindset.
Totally.
Like being in UX in general starts with that problem solving critical thinking mindset.
That was really helpful for me, even before I got into UX, more when I was even like just getting into front end, is like, I wasn't particularly good at math. I wasn't particularly good at science. I didn't like English. And I was like, dang, like what am I good at? And I remember just being in like an HTML class and our teacher was like, hey, for your final exam, you can use the internet. It's fine. This is real world. I was like, oh, so I just need to like know what the right question to ask is to like, and that just like blew my mind. And I was like, well, if I can just, problem solve and figure it out, like I don't have to memorize like all of these theorems or all of these things or like just be smart on the spot or like be a good memorizer. I'm like, if I could just like think about this for a second and like, try to like problem solve, like I could be really good at this. And it like blew my mind. I was like, I'm like, okay, this is what I should be doing. Not, not memorizing theorems and formulas because I'm not good at that. So it's like, man, that really opened my world to something that like I could be good at as non-traditional.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit more in depth of what TechFleet actually is?
Yeah, TechFleet is a global community for people to be able to build the experience that they don't have out of school in any tech field, really, that we're offering in apprenticeships. So it could be marketing, it could be UX, it could be research design, it could be product strategy. We also offer development now. And the gist is we let you form a team, you buddy up with a lead and a bunch of apprentices and go do work with a real client at a real agency with real stakes and real results and a real
wow.
for 8 weeks. Do that as a team, just like you would in a real world on a product team. And we do 1 week UX sprints. So everybody gets like the first taste of agile UX methods. And at the end of those 8 weeks, typically people are just getting hired at that point after their apprenticeship.
Wow.
Sometimes people go on and, do more projects, or they do lead roles. They get experience with other types of things that they saw that they were interested in. So it's
Wow.
like a proving ground for knowledge overall. Like we have social activities too. But the main thing is the apprenticeships.
So who is TechFleet for?
TechFleet's for literally anybody. You don't need experience at all to be in TechFleet. You need experience in the world, but you don't need experience in TechFleet. You kind of need that baseline education first. But when you're ready to actually do the work, anybody can join in TechFleet.
Really?
But kind of the inclusivity of TechFleet is what makes us kind of unique. They even new people that are in the group that aren't in projects can just go and watch the work. They can go shadow, pick someone's brain, something like that. If you're on an apprenticeship, you're in it every day, 10 hours a week, 8 weeks.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that, and that, that sounds kind of crazy to me. But I remember when we initially talked and started, talking, we had a lot of crossover, because that was kind of the model that we took for our internship, where it was just like, anyone can do it. Like, it's more of like kind of recruiting like basketball players, where it's like, if you're tall, you like throwing things through a net, and you can jump a little bit, like, yeah, come do this thing. Right. So it's like more so looking for those like intangibles and that desire to do the thing.
Right.
And that has proved like invaluable for us in the internships we've run. We've hired 50% of the people that have gone through it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been crazy, right? Because it's like, I've had really big like Fortune 500 companies reach out and be like, what are you doing and how did you do it? And, because they run internships and things like that. And they have like all this criteria and, requirements for who does it. And I think there might be a lot of unnecessary like things in that process that exclude a lot of people that, wouldn't be able to participate normally.
Yeah, typically it's juniors in college, seniors in college. But what about the nurses and the teachers and the doctors who want to get into UX, and the people that are like retail clerks that want to get into UX?
Right.
People that don't have that opportunity to go to college or already did it and don't want to go back.
Right.
No, I already have a degree. I already have a lot of skills from other fields. Can I just do what I need to do that? Those people are cut out of internships today.
Right.
The opportunity for, volunteer work is there, and pro bono work, and just more or less like hustling work. That's what you can do. TechFleet gives you that proving ground for the structure on that. So we can just give people options for different types of projects that they want to apply to. You still have to apply. It's super competitive. But if you're in the apprenticeship, you get that guidance and the structure that you need, unlike the other stuff. And you don't get caught up. We're going to be a freelance engine for the 99% of the world too. Unlike Brain Trust and Top Tal that, they give companies the top 3% of talent, but that's not who we're focused on. We're focused on the bootcamp grads, and we're focused on the nurses, and we're focused on the 99%. So we're going to be that place for people.
Wow. Like I say in product design and kind of just in general, but it's like, if you create a new paradigm, you are either doing something wrong and you should just follow the general pattern, or you're onto something new and you're onto something really groundbreaking and original. And I kind of think you might be onto something groundbreaking and original with TechFleet, because it sounds so crazy at face value. But yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit of like what gave you the idea to start it?
Yeah, to make it very dramatic, it was in the middle of quarantine in 2020, and it was right in the thick of all these boot camps, marketing UX. all these people wanting to get into the field and all these companies requiring so much experience before they ever got to an interview with someone. I assume because they were trying to do more with less at the time, hire more experienced people, and, people that could like float day one, try to do work day one, senior level people. And it cut out most of the world of, people that are trying to get into the field. And I think we're seeing job postings now for juniors, but to this day, people are still so reliant on that real world experience that, you could still be applying and not necessarily get a call back because your portfolio doesn't show any real things. So that's where this started. It was just a LinkedIn post. I posted on LinkedIn saying, somebody just needs to give people a chance who wants to help work on projects with real clients with me. And there were, 20 people, 30 people. We built a Slack, we found a client, and the rest is history.
Wow.
The whole thing was an experiment for the first year. And I always thought it was going to be a nonprofit. It actually turned into what's going to be a global startup. We're going to be based in the US, but we're going to be global. And it's always been on that mission of there's that space between you end school and there's so much you need to learn to get into that first job. There's so much about the industry. There's so much about the process, the day-to-day, what the role really looks like in the world, that's what TechFleet gets you, because you're jumping right into the fire on a team. And unlike all the jobs in the world, we're giving you a chance. We're giving you an actual chance to be on that team. Even if you're a shadower, even if you're just joining the meetings every day, silently observing, that's way more than anybody else will give you. If you're a new bootcamp grad and you don't know how the world works, watching that thing for a week could give you a really good confidence about how UX works in the world. So we give people that chance. We give people all those chances, everything that we can. Anything that, people can't get right out of school today, we're trying to build up.
Wow. So how has it impacted people who have gone through that process?
Right now, our hiring rate's around 80%. We have about 60 people out of 80 apprentices. 60 of them have been fully hired, full-time roles. Very little of them are freelance. Most of them are in full-time in-house or agency. And that was from 10 projects where typically there's about 20 people, maybe less than 20 people on a project, like 15 people, 12. And so by this time, 2 years in, we have 12 projects complete and 4 in progress right now. So the list of people who get hired grows every day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are these people just like absolute like rock stars, like born to do UX?
By the time they get through TechFleet, they are.
Right.
They are fresh as hell when they get in.
Wow.
Fresh out of boot camp. But figuratively looking at the textbook day one, what we're trying to do in TechFleet is give structure and maybe like a little bit of written documentation about the framework of Agile, because in true Agile form, we don't have any documentation of how the day-to-day works, or we didn't until recently. So they get all of it firsthand when they join the apprenticeship.
So tell me a little bit about the application process. Like, how does someone get into TechFleet?
Oh yeah, you just apply, just like a job. If you want to be a lead, you don't need experience as a lead. You just apply. The leads that form on the teams are typically one per role. So a lead UX role, a lead research role, a lead design role, a lead strategy role, a lead developer. Sometimes we have co-leads. So we have 2 UX research leads. And then once they form, they go out and pick what categories they care about with apprentices. And then they go interview the apprentices that apply and pick them. They hire them. So the leads are also getting first-time leadership experience ever. They've never led before. They're getting training in managing.
Wow.
And hire too.
So is it kind of like you hire the leads and then the leads hire the apprentices?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, and I have about four project coordinators that can kind of take care of projects. So it'll be me or someone else. And honestly, it should never be about one person picking anybody. Right now, there are 4 people picking the leads.
Wow. That's pretty cool. I guess an obvious question is, how are clients okay with it?
Yeah. Clients get the same thing as if they were working with an agency, and will be cheaper for them.
Wow.
The end result for them is they get a demo every week. They get their handoffs at the end of the project. Clients have been super impressed with what these doobies have been able to create. And they honestly create the same deliverable at the end of the day as a professional agency, because there's a whole collective of them working toward it.
So
We've been really successful, and the teams have been really successful in what they deliver at the end.
do you run into anything where it's kind of like a group project for school where like 2 people do like the bulk of the work and the other people, whether intentionally or unintentionally, don't know what to do or like don't participate as much? Or how does that flesh out?
Sometimes that happens. And I think the dynamic on these projects is the servant leadership style of teamwork, where it's not being dictated to anybody. There is no micromanagement. There's no person at the head of the pack saying, okay, this is what we need to do. Let's go team. The team figures out what they need to do. So the quiet people are as accountable for the work as the loud people. And that dynamic shifts on its own naturally, often, unlike in school, where you have these like really close constraints. Somebody just wants to get the A. I'm responsible for your grade. And so I want to take the work on for you. It's not about the work. It's about the grade. It's about the test in school. But in the real world, it's about the end result, like you care about the end result. So like whoever's on this team at the end of the day needs to have that drive, and the quiet people have their own evolution to getting there too. But in the way that we lead in these projects, really trying to empower people to like get out of their shell, become more confident, speak out. And so a lot of it is encouragement, but it's also the way that we run these.
Do the teams independently get the brief and put together the strategy, or do one of your project coordinators do that? How does that work?
Mm-hmm. The project coordinator will come up with like a working agreement with the client, the scope, the goals, who's going to be on the team, based on what they need, based on their business goals. So clients come to us and they say, I want more engagement, or we need a completely new website, or we need to build a new service. We did a service for somebody before. And so we build a project off that. If they need writing, we put UX writing rules on it. If they need marketing, we put brand and content and whatever on it. And then go find those people for the apprenticeships.
Ooh, so that brings me to another question. How do you find these people?
They find us at this point. We post on Bootcamps, we post on LinkedIn, and I don't know if last time we had a project, it was 300 people that applied, or total. Probably 200 people applied to the design roles, typically.
Wow.
Design and research roles. There's a growing amount of people that are applying to the product management roles too. I think that's like a big area of focus for me, obviously, because I come from product management. But there's a lot of interest in that group, in this group here too, for that.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. So it is kind of tough to get into, right? It's the teams are small and the applicants are large, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The applicants are so large and the teams are relatively small compared to like 200 applicants. There's 4 apprentices that you get picked for research. We do have multiple projects going on at once. That makes it a little easier, but
sure.
Yeah, it is definitely competitive.
Now, is your hope to expand it so big that the 200 folks who apply, maybe 100 are able to land on projects? Or do you think it'll always kind of be that high level of entry to land an apprenticeship?
There will always be that high level of entry in some way in the group. There will always be easier ways to get in as well. We'll probably have a lot of different varieties. Like we'll have freelance things for experienced people. We'll have pro bono projects with nonprofits where like 5 apprentices can join, and there's a lot more openings. And there will be projects that are like true freelance paid projects with clients that are 6 months long, working out into 8-week chunks. But there'll always be that like entry door of like shadowing and getting into the community outside of the projects too. There's a whole lot going on outside the community. I think a lot of the people in the community are still really focused on helping each other too.
Yeah.
So there's a huge social component in our Slack as well that a lot of people like use when they're trying to get into the field for the first time, whether it be meeting with people for mentoring or doing UX book club or whatever.
Yeah.
They want to get out of it.
So can anyone shadow, or is there a process for that?
No. They just look at the web calendar and you pick whatever meetings you want to go to. We started a channel that all the project teams post what they're doing every day. So anybody coming in can just like kind of pick what they want.
Wow. That's
I
incredible.
usually end up meeting with people one-on-one to like introduce myself and talk to them for 30 minutes, tell them like how shadowing works. And once we have a website, we can send people there. But
Nice. So what's like the financials behind this? Like, do people pay to be a part of Tech Fleet? Is it free? Do they get paid? Like what's the economics behind that?
I want to pay apprentices and leads. I never want, like right now, people are doing pro bono nonprofit work. I never want to charge apprentices and leads for this. We're going to be charging bootcamps. We're going to be charging companies. We're going to be charging like clients, potentially taking revenue in other ways.
Wow.
And incubating products that also generate revenue, I think, is the plan as well.
Wow. That's incredible. I think another thing that we did with our internship is like paying to go back to school or paying to do a boot camp or not making any money to do pro bono work is like, that's a barrier to a lot of folks. Like maybe you have kids and you're working working a job and you can't afford to go back to school, or you don't have the time to do those things. So in our approach, we paid people $15 an hour to be a part of our apprenticeship. And like, honestly, that opened the door for so many more applicants, not just as like an altruistic thing, but it gave us a bigger pool of like more applicable people that could be a good fit that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yep. That's a great way to do it. For sure. I know a lot of other programs, some other programs out there like charge or they have like free scholarship. Yeah, I never want to make people pay. I think they're putting so much time and energy and blood, sweat, and tears into the work that they're doing already. And they're doing work for these clients. I want to pay them like they're doing work. So pretty soon this year, I think we're going to get to a point where I want to get to a point where every single project has payment to the apprenticeships. There could be different sizes of different types of projects. We might have 2 people on one project because it's way more of an expert focused project.
Yeah.
So the payment might change too based on the project.
Very cool. Do you have people apply for Tech Fleet based on like project, or is it kind of a generalist apply and then we'll find a project for you?
Yeah, the former. They would apply to like whatever projects, whatever roles they want.
Cool. And is this specifically for people who have come through a boot camp?
Not a boot camp necessarily. You kind of need that education of UX before you get into Tech Fleet, because we are throwing you into the deep end. You need that theory of like week 1, nobody's going to give you a textbook and tell you what to do. Your whole team is going to be like, what do we do? So like having that baseline is definitely going to take you further. And I say that to leads too. You don't need experience leading, but having that educational baseline is going to really help you. You need to work that much harder to get there. And a lot of people build each other up too in these projects too. So there's one person struggling. It's an environment where they can fail safely and also try new things and like have the support they need to try and become more comfortable doing this stuff.
Yeah. Do you have any particular boot camp recommendations on that hand?
Like recommendations for people to go to boot camps?
Like boot camps that have produced really good UXers for your
Yeah.
projects.
I think there's a lot out there. I hear good things about UX Camp, obviously. I think overall, the ones that are really, really great, there's never a gap that you can complete in a boot camp only
Right.
to get to the real world. There's always going to be a gap. But the ones that I think do it well, do it closer to the industry. They have agile training and they have project-based client stuff. And they teach you, the real constraints and limitations of cross-functional teamwork. And then in school, you get that at least baseline education so that when you get into the world, you still don't have the experience, but at least you have the awareness of it.
Yeah.
I've heard of other boot camps that are doing these types of things with like TechFlight too. They do the internships or apprenticeships like UX Cabin's doing.
Yeah. It's kind of curious to me why like our nation as a whole has gone away from like apprenticeships and just gone straightly from like you just go to school and then after school you try to find a job, when it's like, with the exception of maybe like a doctor, like probably 6 months of on the job of any job is like way more valuable than any schooling experience. Like obviously there's exceptions, right? But like by and large, it's like apprenticeships are like super dope. Like, why don't we do these all the time?
Yeah. Same with internships. I think they could be really nice too. Anything that gets them closer to the real world.
Right.
If only people opened up the internships to like wider audiences, not just college students.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. So, you've obviously been working with a ton of folks who are in that in-between stage trying to get their first job. And what are some of the deficiencies that you see or some of the gaps that, you might be able to just speak to or give advice about?
One of the biggest ones that I see is a mindset gap. This thinking around how the process works from the mindset of what the process is on paper versus the process in the real world. Huge gap in mindset. It's the way that you approach the work that makes all the difference. If you try to collect all your requirements up at front and then do your research all in full at the beginning before you move on to your design, you're doing a process called waterfall. And that is an antiquated process in the world. A lot of teams work the opposite way. And the more you work in that environment, the more your mindset shifts. It's actually a philosophy change. We're hardwired in school to follow a phased approach to UX. UX is not necessarily a phased approach in the world. You don't have to make it a phased approach. You can handle the work different ways. So like the mindset and how you handle the work is one of the biggest things that has to change from school.
Yeah. Wow, that's good.
Once that changes, everything else falls in, because the skills you can learn, the tools you can learn, the mindset you have to shift into.
Yeah.
Or you get taught that in school, and that's often not the case. That wasn't for me in a master's.
Wow. Well, and it's interesting because you're like, why don't schools just do it better? It's like, well, the schools aren't going to make a like unlinear, weird process to teach you. Like that wouldn't make any sense. It's just like you kind of need a real world thing to go through in order to like experience it.
Yeah. And you kind of need like 5 of those things to go through it 5 times, because each time you do it, you're gonna be like, oh, the last time I did it that way. Now I'm doing it this way. And then the third time you do it, you're gonna do it a different time again, and you're gonna be like, oh crap, this process is very varied. It's not the same all the time. In fact, like this mindset shift that I see from bootcamp in these tech-led apprenticeships, like week 1, is this like fear of getting it right. This fear of perfection, this fear of like, well, what happens if we don't talk to 7 people in a week? And so there's this anxiety that builds around it, this perfection that we're taught in school that to complete the process, you have to go through every single phase in a certain way. And there is a lot of fear that comes about when you're working in an environment that's different than that, than what you were
Yeah.
taught.
Yeah.
Nobody knows how to float in that. And that's also a huge shift.
Yeah. That's good. So another question I have is like, say someone's kind of in that weird stage where they've gone through a boot camp, they're applying to jobs, maybe they're trying to get an apprenticeship or an internship, and for whatever reason, they're not getting any traction, they're getting ghosted, they're not getting callbacks or interviews. Obviously, there's a lot of things that could be going on there, but you know, rather than just continuing to apply, what are some things that these folks should do to be introspective or to change their approach as to how they could better themselves in the application process?
Yeah, it's a tough situation. Going back to the sales thing before, I think you being able to tell the story of how your previous life plays a role in how you would do as a UXer is one huge thing. But I also think at the end of the day, employers are looking for real case studies. And if they're trained in that way, they're probably looking for that and only that. And if they ghost people, that might be a huge reason why they ghost you. Beyond, do you have any relevant skills from the other parts of the field? Do you have any real actual stake with clients, with stakeholders? Do you have any real result?
Right.
So being able to work toward that, in my opinion, is very important. And being able to produce the case studies from bootcamp, even going back and trying to work with somebody from the real world to make them reflective of the real world goes a long way, I think, in theory. But there's always going to be that, at least right now, while the hiring in America is requiring these years of experience, our culture is changing, I think. Our work culture is it's already been here, but it's kind of forming in such a way that you need that baseline experience before you get the job in this field. So that's why they're ghosting in the beginning. They probably have 1,000 things that they're looking at, and 700 of them don't have real case studies. And those are probably just really easy ways to screen
right
in the beginning.
Right.
So anyway, someone can stand out would be a real project or anything that to me shows closeness to the real world.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Thinking across the different spectrums of UX and product design, you got research, kind of more the information architecture, wireframing type of competency. You have the more UI design, graphic design focused folks. Is there one that is easier or harder that you think to get into when you're trying to get an entry level position?
I think all of them are challenging in their own way. The research takes a lot of empirical and scientific and, methodological approaches to the work that usually are very hard skills that employees are looking for. The design world, I think gets into a lot of application of the theory, you're talking about with interaction design, information architecture, all that. And it also gets pretty technical with the tactical side of Figma and the tools that you use to try to create those dev specs. And that's really important in that role.
Right.
And then product management's kind of the floater between the roles to try to orchestrate everything. And yeah, there's it probably is very specific experience that they're looking for each one.
Right.
Very specific skills that they're looking for each one.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my take on that is I think it's significantly harder to get your first research job because you can do research at the process of doing research doesn't necessarily show if you're talented or competent in it or not.
That's right.
And it's really, really, really hard to differentiate entry-level people's research from each other? Like, how do you stand out? Like, okay, I assume you talk to these people. Awesome. Like, that's
Well,
cool.
as a researcher, I could quickly see things that stand out in my research portfolio.
Really?
Like the methodology to me, the more detailed the methodology is, and everything that includes the participants, the actual test, the materials, as much details as people can put in there to give whoever the reader is the sense of how deep is this method,
Yeah,
and also how much are they playing to like objectivity and bias,
sure.
or like avoiding bias, things like that. I could look
That's
at a
fair.
test plan and see how experienced a researcher is for sure.
Yeah, that's fair. Because I think like me probably being more on the tactical UI side, it's like I can just visually see like, are you good at this? Yes or no? Like, spacing, hierarchy, typography, like it's just very like obvious and apparent. And it's like, it's hard to be really good at UI design and not understand core UX principles. So
Definitely.
it would be incredibly rare for someone to like design a beautiful flow or application and not know the basics of UX or the foundations of like good principles of UX. So I think like
Yep.
no matter what you're doing, whether it's like UI, UX, research, if you're in that junior entry level position, you kind of have to pair it with another thing to be really attractive. Like maybe, you've got really good animation skills, or maybe you got front end chops, or you got project management chops. Like, gotta have something to separate yourself, in my opinion, from all of the billions of other juniors out there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that is a good way to differentiate, especially coming from other fields. Like you can kind of share the skills that you think are relevant from the other fields that you worked in before bringing you into UX.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Morgan, this has been a fantastic interview. I am super excited to see, where TechFleet goes and how it evolves. I think you are onto something here. Wanted to give you the floor here for the last word, to see if you had anything else you wanted to say or include before we close out this episode.
Yeah, although I'm a salesman, I'm not going to be very salesy. I tend not to do sales pitches a lot, but I honestly, I feel like really passionate about TechFleet itself. I think that the community itself, it's not even about me anymore. The community is giving the world of tech a chance that it's never had before in structure. This like cohort that you could go to, this like breeding ground of talent that we can build over time. And like, it's really tough out there, especially in this field. This is not an easy thing to get into. And it's not just TechFleet out there. There's so many other things, services that are out there for this. But it's just a tough situation getting in, because you are expected to have that like extra step before you even get into the paying role, which is ridiculous on paper.
Right. Awesome. Well, again, appreciate the time. Wish you nothing but the best, and look forward to just following your journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Seth. It was great being a guest on this.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us today on the Product Design Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure and go follow our guests. Let them know they did a great job and you learned a lot. More to come in the following weeks as we bring on new guests. Please hit that subscribe button so that you will get these podcasts and learn a ton about the product design community. Excited to see you next time. Thanks.